So in this, the gospel reading, the parts where it talked about Jesus saying, you have heard it said, you should not kill, but I say, whoever is angry with his brother, I will be liable to judgment. Or you have heard it said, you should not commit adultery. But I say, everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. That got me to this process of thinking, I can't judge someone and say, well, that person never committed adultery visibly. Therefore, there must be a good person. Who knows what's cultivating inside of them, which is questions our judgment of people. But the second part of that I then started thinking on, I contemplated on how so much alike we are then. At a basic core, we're all struggling with this. Maybe that's the starting point for all of us to see how we're all brothers and sisters before God, because we are sharing in this journey, the struggle that's happening internally, whether we acknowledge it or not. And so we can't be like, I'm better than this person, I'm better than that person. This person looks like they're better than me.
I just have come to believe we all carry our wounds differently. I think that a lot of us judge because we think our own way of carrying our wounds and our own struggle, we've made it normative. If you really take the plunge with that, it is mind altering. You start recognizing it when you start paying attention to it. You start recognizing it and how often it happens, how often you see it happening in not just in yourself, but in other people too. I think we all struggle to process life, what comes at us, how we respond, how we grow. And there's not just one way to do that. The struggle is universal. And if we really welcome that thought and nurture it, how we are with each other would be different.
From this reading, I got the feeling that Jesus is trying to elevate the commandments and in that same process, elevate us. The commandments at a certain way of looking at it is like the starting point, but there's something deeper, there's something higher to it, which Jesus is getting at. He's leading us to that holy space because it's a journey and it's a process and it's not just a one-stop type of a thing. It's kind of like, okay, you have to work at this. You have to overcome these stumbling blocks to raise up higher.
The point of Jesus becoming incarnate, was to reveal God to people, but not just that. It was to somehow draw us into that shared life of the divine. You do this and you're like more like God is. You're like that and you're not more like what God is. Many people think that the primordial struggle is between law, commandment as law, and conscience, that the struggle is between outer and inner. But I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a looking outside of ourselves to God and what we're called to and invited to and asked to embrace, and even as much as we're able to imitate.
Another way to approach this is that the gospel is saying it's about relationship. And so it's not so much about a certain structure or a certain commandment or law. It's about relationship to one another and why that relationship gets broken. And so I think this is getting at, why is the relationship between one person to another person distorted? And we need to address that. Why are two people or humanity, why can't we coexist? And it's saying that relationship is broken because of where it's starting from. And I think that is the overall message. Jesus is kind of saying, we need to repair these broken relationships and let's get to the root of it. We need to also first address the relationship between ourselves and God. For example, regarding killing, the commandment of killing, if I'm angry at my brother, how can I not be angry at my brother? The parts that's left out is, okay, so how do I handle that? How do I deal with that feelings, that emotion that kind of will lead to me, either actually killing a person or, somewhere in between there. And then that other part is I need to understand my relation to God, understand myself, I am sinful, repent from that and put my life in God's way. And then that kind of jumpstarts entire, okay, even though I may be angry at my brother, have these emotions about another person, but I don't let that cultivate into anything else.
If you look at any broken relationship and go inside yourself, you begin to recognize, if you're honest, you begin to recognize what was inside you or not that began to crumble the relationship. Like maybe you started teasing and it really wasn't teasing, it was mean. Or maybe you stopped being deliberate about strengthening a relationship the first call is to go with him. Maybe that's where the healing can come. Look inside yourself and then discern, what decisions do you make and act on that will bring healing to all the relationships. I think we have to realize we are all capable of egregious things. We are all capable of it. That's the leveler of all of us. But we tend to think, oh no, I haven't ever killed anybody. But I think if you jump on that train and ignore the fact of our connection in the possibility of destroying relationships, and then I think we're missing something really big.
If we begin to play into that of thinking, I could never do such a thing, that's where we start thinking ourselves better than other people and saying, oh, well, of course, they deserve that. Of course, they're in that position because they're that bad person doing the type of bad behavior, as opposed to saying, like, I too struggle with that. And so I guess part of what you kind of got me thinking was like, it's always choice. There's choices that we face throughout our lives. Like, am I going to do this or that? It leads up to a series of events where eventually it's displayed in a certain way. In the extreme case relating to the gospel, someone commits adultery, someone commits murder, but there are series that lead up to that. Either the thoughts, certain kind of a festering of anger, emotions, lust, to eventually whatever the end action is. That's where contemplation comes in, or reflection of like, how did I do today? Am I really considering how this action I did today, how I spoke to someone, failed to speak to someone, really affected someone else? And if we actually tackle that, address that, that's where it can cease at that point from spilling over to something else. But it takes that process of us kind of identifying it, truthfully identifying what's happening in our actions and addressing it.
If you look at ruptures in relationships or between me and creation or whatever, if you stop and are honest with yourself, you begin to see that you made some choices that broke something down gradually. So gradually that you didn't do it on purpose, but you could wake up one morning and the rupture would be complete, and you could say, well, I never intended that. But these little tiny choices, they're cumulative and they add up. So that, to me, the value of it is to check myself before I do something enormously and egregiously bad, if I'm able to be honest enough about it and follow through and pray to God for help in facing it. We're invited by this gospel to pay attention to what's inside, not to say, well, laws are childish. What's most important is what's in me. It's more what I bring to what has been presented by the divine as good and God-like. So then this is inviting me to act like God, to be like God, to reveal God more by how I am. And I can't do that in a rote way without it coming from the inside place. Laws in themselves can't transform people. And that's what I think was part of Jesus' whole life. And especially after his own baptism, he wanted people transformed. All of the words Jesus ever spoke in his existence, even those that we don't explicitly know, they all came out of his unique experience with his Father. And that's what infleshed or incarnated the laws that defined the people. The laws were never meant to segregate people and keep them separate from other people. Well, I obey this, but you don't. Therefore, it never was, because the most primal part of God is togetherness. That's who God is in Trinity, in the way God loves in a Trinitarian way. There should be no outlier. There aren't in the heart of God. So anything that causes us to separate, I think that was always being challenged, and when Jesus said all of what he did say, he was speaking out of his own experience with his own Father. This is what compassion is. This is what forgiveness is. And that's of God. And you are too, but act like it.
Going on the idea of choice, I think that's what Sirach chapter 15, verse 15 to 20 is, I guess, a constant message for all of us, is that we can choose to keep the commandments, not just the Old Testament commandments, but kind of what Jesus is expanding the commandments to mean. So we can choose to keep them or not. In every point of our lives, through our lives, we have that choice to make to act holy, act the way Jesus would, or not. And that's our that's our decision. I think part of this requires a pause to contemplate, think about what we're doing. I think that requires a pause in our lives. I think the challenge then is if in the culture and the society, because of technology, things are more rapid, more instant, how can we have that pause? So if people are able to send messages very quickly, publicly, so the first thought that I have, I just send in social media, put it online, while actually thinking of what would this mean? How would this affect someone else? Me having his opinion. We lose that ability to pause, think, consider the effects of this. There's a movement within society, within the culture to not pause, not think. Maybe that's where kind of some of the issues are stemming from. Why certain things are more heightened, there's more conflict, there's more issues. It's because as a society, we can't pause. We're embedding in ourselves the ability to be quick, instant, and no time to review our actions.
I think we're meant to look to, it goes back to what you said as choices. I think look to how we experience life, what we experience, how we connect that in relationships to the world, to God, to each other, and what direction are we moving because of our experiences? What do our experiences reveal about God?